Babe, you think the kids will do shootouts here?
Yeah, probably.
You think they can beat me?
Did you get it out of your system?
Yeah, Lowe's trip.
We're Aubrey and Deleir, designers and DIYers, teaming up with Lowe's to help homeowners combine their DIY wants and needs to create a blended space that everyone loves. This is Blending, how to install artificial turf. Previously, we met homeowners Lana and Hassan, who are hoping to transform their backyard into a playful, entertaining space. After clearing the yard, we took down a portion of their old fence and built a new one. In this episode, we'll be installing turf to create a fun play space for the kids.
We're here at Lowe's picking up what we need for the turf installation for the Dandauschle backyard. There are so many kinds of turf out there. When selecting, you want to think about your total square footage, how much foot traffic it will get, and of course, cost. Since we're hoping the kids use this for play, we chose a turf that can handle a ton of action.
Before we get started, let's talk about the border of your turf. There are many options. You can use pavers, steel or rubber edging, brick, or even railroad ties. We've started with steel edging, but you can use whatever border makes the most sense for your budget and style. Check out the video for how to install edging in the description below.
Using a shovel, clear the surface, existing grass roots, and mulch. For larger areas, you can rent a hydraulic tiller from Lowe's. You'll want to remove 2 to 4 inches of soil depending on how much aggregate you use. Remember, your turf will look like your base, so if it's uneven and bumpy, your turf will be too.
Installing turf is a heavy and lengthy process, so we recruited the help of a friend. You don't want weeds growing through your turf later on. Adding a weed barrier will prevent most weeds. You'll want to pick one that still allows for good drainage. Roll out the weed barrier to cover the entire area with about 4 inches of overlap at each intersection. Secure the weed barrier with landscape anchors every 12 inches along the edges and overlaps.
Now that the weed barrier is down, the real fun begins. Aggregate is also called subbase. It's the material you put beneath turf to help with drainage and turf erosion. And it also keeps the surface level. Soil will shift beneath your turf, so putting down a compacted aggregate base will keep your turf in better shape for much longer.
It's a pretty light load you got there.
You think so?
Yeah, you feeling tired? Add 2 to 4 inches of aggregate. The type of aggregate available will vary based on your region, but the most important thing is to use a fine-grained aggregate. We're using 1/4 inch minus decomposed granite. Using a rake, spread the aggregate until it is a uniform surface. You can also use a screed.
Next, you'll tamp or roll the aggregate down to compact it. We're using a water drum roller, but you can also use a plate compactor. A hand tamper will be useful around the edges and in tight spaces. Because we're using decomposed granite on this project, we like to spray the aggregate with a light mist in between roller rounds, which helps with compaction.
As the aggregate settles into the soil beneath it, you'll likely end up with low and high spot. To achieve a flat surface, you may need to add more aggregate to the low spots or remove some from the high spots and then recompact those areas. Since we know our border is level, we're referencing our border to make sure that the aggregate is level. You can also use a laser level.
Turf needs to be stretched tightly to be installed correctly. Roll out your turf in the sun a few hours ahead of time to allow the turf to heat up, which will make stretching way easier.
It works!
Roll out your turf over the aggregate. Turf has a grain direction, so you want to make sure that the grain is going in the same direction for all sections of the turf. When attempting to line up your turf, shaking the edges and getting air underneath makes it much easier to adjust and align. Use a utility knife to cut the turf to size. Make sure to leave at least 6 inches of overlap at the intersections. Make your final cuts from the back to avoid cutting the turf blades. Don't trim too much. Remember, you can always trim more, but you can't add any back. You'll want to determine which edge you nail down first. Cut the edge exactly to the border along both adjacent edges, but leave at least 6 inches of extra turf at the edge opposite your starting edge. This will give you something to pull with when you're stretching the turf in the next step.
Starting from one side, nail the turf into place. Use 5-inch galvanized nails like these, spaced out every 6 inches. Each of these nails should be no closer than 2 inches from the edge of the turf. Don't overhammer these nails, or you'll leave a divot that will show through the turf. It's okay to still see the nail head. The infill will cover it up later.
As you go, you'll notice sometimes that the turf will puff up. In those sections, you want to press it down and make sure you pull all the slack before you go ahead and nail that section down.
Most of the nails are going to go in the edges, but the internal portion of the turf is also going to need nails. Create a 24-inch by 24-inch grid throughout the internal portion of the turf as well. Once your turf is nailed down, it's time to cut the final edge. You want to cut it to where the turf backing touches your border so that there is no gap.
Since our turf area is rectangular, we were able to cover the whole area with one piece of turf. If you need to seam two pieces together, here's what you'll do. Cut the turf to size from the back, leaving a small overlap of the backing material on each side. This will help the turf blades blend together. Line the turf edges up carefully. Rub your hands across the turf blades to blend the two sides together, making sure that the seam is invisible. Seaming tape or artificial grass tape is used to join the two pieces of artificial grass. Carefully fold back each side and lay down a section of seaming tape onto your aggregate. Using a hammer, secure the seam tape with landscaping anchors or 5-inch galvanized nails. Using a caulk gun, apply turf adhesive to the seam tape. Spread the adhesive using a trowel or a spare piece of seaming tape. You'll want as much surface area of adhesive as possible for a stronger seam. Carefully fold the turf edges over the seam tape and adhesive, making sure that they're lined up properly. It won't adhere instantly, so you can pull it back up and retry if it's off. Your adhesive will dry within about 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the temperature outside. Nail your turf down just like any border, 6 inches apart and 2 inches from the edge. Do this on both sides of the seam.
Infill is made of silica sand or rubber pellets. It helps to weigh down the turf and make it look less matted with foot traffic. It also helps disguise the galvanized nail heads. Spread the infill evenly across the entire area. We're using a Scott's Broadcast fertilizer spreader for an easy and consistent application, but you can also spread it by hand. Just make sure you get an even application. Brush the infill with a stiff bristle push broom. The goal is to work the infill down into the turf blades, which will make the blades stand straight up and look less matted and more natural. So always keep downward and forward pressure on the broom, covering the entire turf area several times. Brushing will help the fiber stand up and hide the seams. Use a leaf blower to remove debris before it gets matted into the turf. Use a water hose to spray the turf when there is excessive dust or to remove pet waste. Brush the grass against the grain to keep it from becoming matted. You can use a broom or an Ego Power Plus system with a brush head for more efficient and better brushing. Boom!
This turf turned out great. It was a lot of work, but it was so worth it. The Dandashli's backyard is really coming together. I decided to pick up some items to spruce up their backyard and round out this portion of the makeover. So if you haven't heard about Lowe's Rewards, let me tell you that it's actually the best. It's a loyalty program that gives you points for purchases and allows you to earn Lowe's money to use for what you want. And if you get the Lowe's Rewards credit card, you get 5% off eligible purchases every day. The more you use it, the more you earn and save. All right, I'm back at our project and I'm so excited to unload all the plants I just picked up from Lowe's. This greenery is not only gonna add a nice pop of color and an exciting design element, but it's also gonna help hide the transition between the new fencing and the old fencing.
All the products and tools you saw in this video were purchased at Lowe's. Visit Lowes.com for more inspiration to transform your yard and home.